No, Mickey.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Sports with Friends. We're going to do this live on Twitch, so anybody watching, you can reply on the chat room, but I can't respond because it's a podcast. So I hope people are enjoying this podcast recording. My friend Bill Michaels is here. He'll get a proper introduction, much more proper when we start the actual podcast. So you good? You ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do it, baby. Coming down in 3, 2, 1. And welcome everybody to another edition of Sports with Friends. This is episode 284. This is our third or fourth of the month of the year 2021, and today is inauguration day. So, we have a new president. The podcast doesn't sound any different whatsoever, and I'm not sure it's going to make a difference. It's also NFL Championship Week. We're going to talk a lot about that on this podcast. You could also get the latest odds with our head odds maker from Bovada Sportsbook. That is Patrick Morrow, and we'll hear from him in about 10 minutes or so. Our guest today here on the podcast is a longtime friend. Usually, I go on his show. I've done that for years. Now he's between shows. He's going to have a new show real soon. He's no longer with a certain fan in Milwaukee, but he has been a longtime radio veteran, a Wisconsin icon. I mean, everybody in Wisconsin seems to know who this guy is, and I can't believe we've had 284 episodes and I haven't talked to Bill Michaels yet. Although Bill has been instrumental in helping set up episodes of the podcast. And we know that to be true. So you've been instrumental behind the scenes. Now you finally get your chance to be in the sun. Welcome, Bill Michaels.
And it's not recorded to where I'm doing the interview with somebody else and you're editing in your questions. So that's kind of cool. I'm liking it all live.
Sir, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never heard of that before. Yeah, well, that story's going to come out. We might as well. Bill, first of all, welcome. And for those of our audience who knows you, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe Bill Michaels and Seth Everett are doing a show again. But there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that don't know Milwaukee radio. Tell me a little bit about your career. Where did you start? How long have you been doing this? You always have a certain intelligence on the air, so I just assume you're older than me, but I don't necessarily know that.
I am 54. So
Yeah,
that'll tell you. Yeah, I'm a little bit older. No, I grew up in Cincinnati. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. And when everybody else, was in high school listening to all the rock stations, the top 40 stations, I was listening to sports talk. We had Bob Trumpy. Remember Bob Trumpy?
Sure.
Him and Don Criqui doing NBC games years ago.
And Don Criqui was an Imus in the Morning sports anchor.
Right. So, and Bob Trumpy started doing sports talk at 700 WLW. And as a kid in high school, I thought, this is what I want to do. And so I'm actually been lucky enough to be able to climb to the top of the hill and be able to do this. I started out in a little town called Rushville, Indiana, and I bet you nobody knows what Rushville is famous for. But if you're a NASCAR fan, that's where Tony Stewart got his nickname, Rushville Rocket. So covered a little bit of Tony Stewart. I got my start in a really weird way at the Indianapolis 500. There was a company called Force One, which is France's version of ESPN, and Jacques Villeneuve and company, they were coming over and going to take a crack at the 500. And I just happened to be in the pits. I just went there as a fan. But I had a radio station credential from this little station in Indiana. And some guy pointed, and I thought he was pointing at me. So I went over and started talking to him, and he had an interpreter. And I ended up getting a job being turn 4, the color commentator for turn 4 for the Indianapolis 500 that year. Turns out that he was actually pointing at the guy behind me, but because that guy didn't turn around and I walked over and started talking to them, in the translation, things got screwed up and I ended up becoming the guy. So I parlayed that tape into a television tape back in Cincinnati. And then from there, I went and did some radio in Columbus, Ohio. And I was familiar with Columbus, going to Ohio State and such. And then back to Cincinnati. And then finally, I was working at WOW. And I had a couple of guys ahead of me, and I was never really going to beat those guys out for the job. I had one, which was Andy Furman, and Andy Furman was a long time with Fox.
Oh, sure.
For Fox Sports. Yeah, but excuse me, the two guys that were ahead of me are now big time. One was Boomer Esiason, who you know there in New York, and the other one was Chris Collinsworth. And both of those guys were doing sports talk. So unless I killed them or they died, I was never going to jump leapfrog those guys. And then when I finally got hired by the Packers, I got hired by the Packers in their flagship back in 1999. And that's when Collinsworth and Boomer and everybody started, splitting off. But we all left about the same time. And
right.
Our careers have taken a path. But that's kind of how I ended up here.
Andy Furman did a show with Artrell Hawkins on Fox Sports Radio in the mornings, and I used to go on with them. And then I met Andy when I was with the Mets radio network, and we went to Cincinnati. And I hung out with Andy, had lunch with Andy, and Andy came to the ballpark, and he was great, and he always seemed like he was the mayor. That was the best way to describe him.
He was a great guy, and it's funny because Andy got into some trouble and ended up getting, I think, let go from WLW, and he went on to other things, obviously. But Andy was the guy that was old school. When I would walk through the hallways and everybody else is sending out an email or just responding, this is in the beginning of texts and phones and such. Andy's still sitting at an old typewriter, typing out letters, sending letters off, licking envelopes, using stamps. And he would write probably 30 letters a day. He was a writer by trade, but 30 letters a day. And then one of the things that he'd always told me was just respond. People just appreciate if you just respond and say, hello, how you doing? I'll get back to you, whatever. At least people know you care, which is why I feel bad when you texted me a couple of times. I didn't get back right away. I always hear him back in the back of my head. But Andy taught me a lot. Andy was a very interesting guy.
Yeah, and when I started this podcast, that was the whole idea, was just to talk to my friends. That was literally the only point of it. And sometimes my friends would be famous friends, but that wasn't the goal. The goal wasn't to get famous people on a show. It was more about, let's just put people that I like on the show. And what I hope that people get from Sports with Friends is just they know me and the people I talk to. You don't have to love the subject. Not every subject is for everyone. If one week I'll have a tennis guy, one week I'll have an Olympic wrestler, next thing I'll have somebody on NHL expansion, and it just goes around and around and around and around. And I love that. I love that nature of having a show like this where you could literally do anything. You can talk about anything. You've been entrenched now in Wisconsin, though, for 15, 20 years?
Going on 21. I got here in 1999. I interviewed in 98. Got here in 99, and I obviously was lucky enough to see Favre play. As a matter of fact, when I got here and I started doing the postgame show on the Packers radio network, my partner was Brian Noble, former linebacker for the Packers. But Brian had a really good relationship with Irv Favre, Brett's dad. And Irv used to walk past our broadcast studios at Lambeau Field and always want to come in and just kind of shoot the stuff with us in that Southern drawl. And Irv was like the mayor. You talk about a rock star. Irv was as big a star as Brett was in Green Bay. So Irv ended up coming on with us. Once they renovated Lambeau Field, Irv ended up coming on and doing the postgame show with us. And it was neat because we could talk to Irv Favre and let him critique Brett. Because Irv, remember, was an old football coach. So Irv, we would say, you know what, Brett had a really good game, Irv, talk about what you thought. And Irv would say, blank, he'd say, he threw that one pass over the middle that got tipped and picked off. Had he pump fake one time? He was the guy that would critique Brett harder than anybody would critique Brett. And we would know it. We just couldn't say it. So Irv would do it. And I'm telling you what, it was a line of people lined up to get his autograph and to say hello. But one of the best stories about Irv Favre, the best. Irv loved his Budweisers.
Okay.
And you couldn't get Budweiser at Lambeau Field. So Brett would have Budweiser brought up to his suite. So it comes Christmas time. It's been the entire season, coming to the end of the year. And the girl that would always serve us, we did it from a place called Curly's Pub upstairs atop the atrium at Lambeau Field. Okay. And they put us on a stage up there, and then they would broadcast it to the stadium. So everybody in the stadium and outside could hear it. So you'd have 60,000 people outside tailgating, and then our show was on. on the network. And so the same girl would serve us. So Irv, we always made a deal with, because if it was a bad game, Irv would have a few too many buds before he came down to join us and let it fly a couple times. So Irv would come down and we'd say, look, you can have a couple beers in the first half, a couple beers in the second half, but then when you come down with us, then you can start having some beers as the show goes on, because he only spent about an hour with us. And so the same girl would serve him. So we would always have, I drink like Sprite or water, and we would all get coffee mugs. And the wink and a nod was always Irv wanted coffee, and that was fill it with Budweiser. So we had a new girl at Christmas time, and you could hear Wayne Larry, the Packers, in my ear, and I would always know the minute he starts to get into the stats and statistics, I got about a minute before we go live.
Right.
So we're getting all our notes together, and she's bringing up our drinks, and I see the engineer in my corner of my eye, and I can hear him. He's like, okay, we're about ready to air. We're ready to air. He's like, we got 30, and he's counting me down. He's doing this, and gets to 5. The girl sets our drinks down, and then he goes, and just as he points at me, you could hear her, who the blank put coffee in my coffee? Because she didn't know. Put Budweiser there. And he fired off an F-bomb, and it was like an old E.F. Hutton commercial. Everybody, because it went out over the air, everybody got quiet and looked, and Irv looked at me, and Brian Noble's now in tears. He's laughing so hard. And he looks at me and says, everybody hear that? And I said, welcome to the Green and Gold Posting Show. How are you looking? And then we just went on. Nobody really acknowledged it after that. But that was
I love it. Because you said 99, you were probably there with one of my favorite Milwaukee stories. My Milwaukee story, my first one starts in 2001. I was at the opening of Miller Park. And that's a distinct memory, because that was the first stadium opening I think I had ever been to at that point. It was my first year with Major League Baseball, but 2 years prior, I was in Seattle, and one of my best friends and I think this story is told on episode 190. So this is 284. So episode 190, scroll back and find the episode. Softy, Dave Mahler from KJR in Seattle. Dave and I are very close. Dave was a groomsman in my wedding, if there's any context. And Dave is one of my best friends. The game, it was a Monday night game where Mike Holmgren goes back to Lambeau. First time as the Seahawks coach. And Dave and his co-conspirators, I don't know who else was with him, go to Lambeau Field. They want to check out Lambeau Field. And the security at Lambeau Field was really lax. This is, again, 1999. This is pre-9/11. There's no way anything close to this happens now. But they showed their media passes, and they just wanted to go in, and someone let them in. Right. And now they're walking in the tunnel of Lambeau Field, and they go into the Packers locker room.
Oh, wow.
And my friend, and I'll never forget this as long as I live, my friend says, hey, somebody take a picture of me wearing Brett Favre's helmet. And he grabs Brett Favre's helmet, and he flips it to put it on his head, and index cards with all the plays come out. Right. And they splatter all over the floor. And they panic, and they quickly put the index cards back together, put the thing, and they make a run for it, and they never go back. The Seahawks won that game.
I do. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And
but the playoff
can't tell me it's not connected.
Right. The playoff game after that was the snow game remember when Hasselbeck says, we want the ball, we were going to score first in the overtime in the snow. That was the next time Holmgren came back, and they ended up beating them.
That's right.
But right. There's some good stories there. Yeah.
That's a great story. I remember President Bush threw out the first pitch at the opening of Miller Park, and he bounced it. Mm-hmm. And that is the precursor to October of that year, where he's wearing the bulletproof vest, and Derek Jeter says, you cannot bounce it.
Right.
This is Yankee Stadium. They'll boo you. And that's that famous story. There's an ESPN 30 for 30 about it. It's a classic story. And all I remember from that moment is he remembers Milwaukee. and he remembers he couldn't adjust to having the bulletproof vest. He needed to practice, and he had never done it before, and he couldn't extend his shoulder, and he bounced it at Miller Park. That is my first memory of being physically in Milwaukee. The other one was the All-Star game and the fire at the Pfister Hotel.
Right.
Do you know about that one?
I remember that, yeah. And they had smoke up like there's a shaft that goes up the middle of that hotel where the kitchen is.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a fire within that shaft. Yeah, I do remember that, because I remember that was an incredible weekend. Obviously, we ended in a tie.
That was the mudslide on the Sunday.
Right. So we had
Charlie Manuel wiped out, and my poor guy, Charlie Manuel wiped out, and he was fired by the Indians 5 days later.
Yeah, it was a deluge. I remember they were having batting practice.
Yeah.
That they had the batting practice, and Barry Bonds hit not the scoreboard. Now this is a 550-foot shot,
right?
But there was Kohler Company was a sponsor, and the sign was above the stadium, and he would have hit it out of the top of the stadium had that Kohler sign not been there.
Right.
And as he hit it, we had lightning and rain and everything. So Richie Sexson at the time looks to me and he says, I got to do something spectacular, because otherwise he was going to be shown up by Barry Bonds. He ends up hitting one that hits the curve of Bernie Chalet's slide in left field, and it curves and hooks up into Bernie Chalet. Yep. And he said, who thought that I'd hit one into the house that way? And then they started calling their shots after that.
Yeah.
And it was a great night. And unfortunately, the game ended in a tie, and that changed the complexity of the All-Star game and the weight of the All-Star game for many years after.
Yeah, that was unfortunate, because it was a great event. It was a great week. I thought the city, that was one of my favorite examples of the city embracing the All-Star experience. Seattle had done it the year before. My first All-Star experience was Denver in '98. And it was the same vibe, and Milwaukee really embraced it. What I remember is the before we get to the tie, the night of the home run derby. So the monsoon night is the Sunday night. The Monday is the fire. And I remember I was dating a girl who was staying at that hotel. She worked for baseball. We were dating. It wasn't like anything scandalous. I was single, she was single. And cell phones were not attached to us like they are now.
Right.
And so she left when they said to evacuate, and left her phone in the room. And I had no way of getting in touch with her. And I remember walking up the parking lot, looking at all the guests, looking for her.
Yeah.
And I see Bud Selig in his pajamas. And I said, I can't get that image out of my head. I said it out loud, and there were a couple of people I knew, including Rob Manfred.
Right.
And I remember Rob Manfred, and I want to say 15 years later. Now, Rob Manfred hates my guts now, but Rob Manfred came over to me and asked if I remembered that night. He goes, do you remember that night at the Pfister when we saw Bud in his pajamas? And like 15 years later, after he had become commissioner, that was a distinct image of him. And I'll never forget that. And it's one of the strangest events that I'll ever think of, because, like I said, it was so much fun. We had such a great time, and it was such a great experience. I've never had a bad experience in Milwaukee, ever.
Now, did you go to the party the night before when they had built the new art museum and the Calatrava display?
Yes,
so
the gala.
You crossed paths. We didn't know it because I was there.
Oh, that's so funny.
I had gone with a couple of different people, but I was invited, oddly enough, because at the time I was working for the flagship. And so I ended up working for ESPN to do the celebrity game. And I was doing the broadcast.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So I did some stuff
that was
with
the
them.
Sunday. That's after the Futures game.
Correct. And then Bud had asked me if I would work with them. But my best Bud Selig story, there's a little place in Milwaukee called Gillies Custard. They serve ice cream. And it's famous because Bud, when he's in town, usually that's where he ends up at noon. He goes and usually gets his hot dog and his custard and everything. And I'd always heard the rumors, that he was always there. And it just so happened that I had been in that area at this particular time. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go over. And so I go in, and their custard's really good. And so I go in and I get a little cup of this stuff, and I'm kind of sitting there looking around. And there's a couple of guys, that are standing around in darker suits. And I'm kind of thinking to myself, they look like they're here to protect or guard or be with somebody. I don't know what they're doing. And I look over, and this Lexus parked in the back of the parking lot. And I see this like paper, and it's in front of his face. It's a hot dog wrapper, and he's got it up like this, and he's holding it, and you can clearly see him like licking the paper. And as the paper comes down, it's Bud's eating a hot dog and licking all the stuff off the hot dog off the paper. And so I gave him a wave, and every now and then we'll run into each other. There's a good Italian restaurant on the north side that he lives near. I'll see him every now and then. But yeah, it's a lot of good Bud stories in town.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. You mentioned Ohio State.
Yes.
You're a Buckeye through and through.
I grew up in Cincinnati, went to Ohio State, played there, tore my knee up, so I didn't really get a chance to show my wares too much. But I mean, you go back to 85 and 86, Earl Bruce, the last 2 years of Earl Bruce as the head coach before they brought in John Cooper. But oddly enough, the tight end position was being taught by then a young grad student named Urban Meyer. So, you go full circle to where he is today. It was a few years back that I had gotten a nice note. And whether it was from Urban or somebody signed it, but a lot of the guys that have played there and been through that program and stuff got a nice letter from Urban about, hey, it was a great, thing to be working with the Ohio State Buckeyes and the tradition and such. So, but yeah, I don't necessarily always agree with everything they do, but I certainly think it's one of the top programs in the country, whether you want to criticize it or not. It's still, there's when you mention college football, you always mention Ohio State, Alabama, Notre Dame. There's some blue bloods when it comes to college football.
How did you handle on the air the accusations of the assistant coach with Ohio State and how Urban Meyer knew about it and didn't do anything? The assistant coach was accused of beating his wife to a pulp. I mean, just right. Being disgusting. And supposedly, allegedly, and this is all allegedly, she told Urban Meyer's wife. Right. Now, it's my podcast. I'll say what I want, but there's no way he didn't know, and he did nothing.
I agree with you. He didn't do anything. It was the job and upsetting the apple cart versus the well-being of somebody else, and you lose a lot of respect for Urban in that particular case. And obviously, he's had transgressions in the past. Where if you watch the Aaron Hernandez story, you go down to Florida, and look what happened down there. And he knew some of the things going on behind the scenes regarding Aaron Hernandez. And he is a prime example of an incredible motivator of men, an incredible gatherer of talented leaders of men, and an incredible strategist when it comes to leading. But when it comes to the day-to-day care, love, and concern for certain people, don't upset the apple cart for the program, because the program is my program and it's a whole versus the individual warts that are on the whole. And I don't mean to diminish, somebody beating their wife as a wart, but he looks the other way. And that is a crime. I mean, that is a shame because he had the power.
It was unconscionable. Yeah, it was awful.
He had the power to change it. He had the power to bring it to light. He had the power to not only bring it to light, but to then take it further and be a promoter of anti-violence against women and take a stand and really use his platform to say, look, I will not tolerate this. Let me set the standard for every other coach in the NCAA or anywhere else for that matter. And instead he chose to look the other way. And to me, that's the coward's way out.
Why is it that, and this sounds really weird, but I don't understand. Look, I don't understand abuse. I don't understand Sandusky, for example. And I used to say, if you need to listen to me to talk about what Sandusky did was unconscionable, then tune to another place, because that's Captain Obvious. What I don't understand is, like what you just eloquated so brilliantly, is why doesn't Joe Paterno put a stop to it? Why doesn't Urban Meyer put a stop to it and
I,
use the
Ur-
platform? Because especially in this digital age where everything is posted on social media, and in those days social media still existed. I don't understand how you can't turn a negative into a positive, and they did the exact opposite.
I don't get it. I've always said the reason those who don't blow the whistle stand quiet is maybe because they're afraid of their own closet doors being open. I mean, I don't know, but that's usually one cause.
Okay.
Or the other is I've got a lot of success. I don't want to bring a negative light to the program that I'm operating because this would blow such an incredibly dark scandal upon my program. I could lose recruits because who wants to be recruited to where the coaches are allowed to beat their wives or the assistant coaches are allowed to rape children? So I, I I guess that could hold them back. But I mean, just in the sense of humanity, you have to have a space in your heart that is dark and solid and callous and gone if you don't give a damn enough to say stop. This has to end. I cannot allow this to happen on my watch. I think, to be honest with you, I would rather my child, and my kids are in their 30s now, but if my kid was being recruited and he was being recruited by a coach who blew the whistle, who said, I don't care how bad my program gets, I will never allow this crap to
I'd love it.
take him.
Right.
That's a stand-up guy. That's the guy I want my kid to play for. That's the guy that gives a damn, as opposed to the guy that gets caught 10 years down the road knowing that you're a son of a bitch. You know what I mean? So I would rather play and have my kids play for the guy that stands up and takes a stand in that case. And I agree with you about Joe Paterno. I mean, look, after what Joe Paterno said to the grand jury, I said, had Joe Paterno not passed away, chances are he goes to jail. I mean, he lied to the grand jury about not knowing anything, and then clearly, obviously, according to the insurance transcripts from the case earlier, he did. He not only knew about it, he turned the other cheek. So, I mean, that's just God, it's hard to believe that actually happened. It's like we tucked it away in our mind and our memory to say, don't ever let it happen again. But it's such an ugly, ugly scar.
But it's weird because if you're listening to this on the week that it's released, and like I said, we're releasing this on Inauguration Day. But if you're listening to this in the future, and this is my standard Sports with Friends line, so bear with me. If you're listening to this in the future, do tell us how the flying car is, and let us know how we get out of COVID, because I'm very anxious to know all these things. But the week that this is coming out, I'm actually writing a column for Barrett Sports Media about the media and how when Urban Meyer got hired by Jacksonville, there wasn't a comment about the assistant coach or the transgressions or anything. I couldn't find it anywhere, and I looked. And yet, the hypocrisy of that is this week there is a story about the New York Mets general manager, Jared Porter, who I'll be the first person to say I don't know from a hole in the wall. But Jared Porter sent unwanted and lewd texts to a reporter and was fired in less than 12 hours of the story breaking.
Right.
And there's some questions about ESPN supposedly had this story for 4 years and they didn't do anything, which reminds me of the assistant coach at Syracuse, Bernie Fine.
Right, Bernie Fine, yeah.
You know, because when the Sandusky thing gave ESPN a bunch of ratings, all of a sudden the Bernie Fine story came back, even though ESPN had the Bernie Fine story for 12 years, didn't think it was credible and didn't do anything, and then literally took their scruples and threw them away just to continue this ratings wash that they were getting. This was during the whole Penn State scandal. And what I find unconscionable is how the media just gave Urban Meyer this complete pass last week when his hiring, like, oh, the big question about Urban Meyer is whether or not he takes Trevor Lawrence. No, it's how does any grown man respect a word he says?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know, first of all, I don't know how Urban's going to do. We've seen so many quality coaches come from the college ranks into the professional ranks and fail miserably and very quickly lose respect. So I would have loved to have seen the question asked. I think, and also I think you noticed this too. There is a legitimate fear of an entity, of an outlet asking the question and then being banned or not getting the scoop or the story or the clicks or whatever it is that we're searching for in today's day and age. And that's a sad thing, too. The one thing that I've said over and over again, while we do have a tremendous amount of freelance journalists that are out there with cameras and phones and recording devices and the ability to garner information, we have also lost journalistic integrity. We have also lost the ability to ask the question and really just want to know the answer to the question, because there's always a motive behind it in today's day and age. It's not really that you're digging for a story. I mean, I don't think we've ever come out with, say, Watergate in today's day and age. We don't have enough people that want to.
Right. They would tweet it too fast.
Right. That's clicks. And nobody would actually delve deep enough to really find what's swimming below the surface. And I think that's part of it too. Everybody's enamored with Urban Meyer and the record and the pomp and circumstance of him taking over a flailing Jacksonville program, rather than saying, look, this guy comes with a lot of credibility, but here's one of the major warts. So what kind of a culture do you figure you're going to promote inside Jacksonville, inside the walls of that front office, if you're going to carry this kind of baggage behind you? And what kind of respect do you hope to gain when you walk through the doors from the female employees inside Jacksonville's headquarters? I mean, that would be one of the legitimate questions.
Well, and I don't want to do this whole podcast on Urban Meyer, but the thing that I find fascinating about Urban Meyer, and the reason I brought this up to you, is I have talked to Buckeye people. And when I say Buckeye people, either alums, fans, whatever, for different walks of life. You're a Buckeye person. That's right. The way I characterize you. It's not meant to be derogatory, but there has been this unconditional support for Urban Meyer. And that fascinates me too. Like the blind leading the blind. It's the same people who got on me when I said I thought Penn State should have the death penalty. I did and my reason for the death penalty was, it was very simple. I always think of the underlings. I come from the trenches, and I always think that there was some janitor or some, equipment guy or somebody that we don't know about that knew about this stuff. And if you give them the death penalty, they all have to get out of there. They all, everybody, you wipe clean. By doing what they did, they let somebody slip through the cracks. And so there's somebody still affiliated with that school that knew about Sandusky and looked the other way. No, not in the position that Joe Paterno was in, but something from that disgustingness still permeates that program.
Right.
And that's that was my reason. I knew there'd be collateral damage, and people said, what about the small businesses that are outside the Happy Valley and all that? And I knew I took all of that into account. But to me, Penn State should have had the death penalty. And what I'm just saying, Urban Meyer, when Fox Sports hires Urban Meyer, I don't care because I don't watch those games. That doesn't impact my life. They're not doing a Syracuse game. What do I care? But now he's being asked to lead men. And I was just saying that I thought the journalism was so slanted. And then to see these columns coming out of the woodwork, making Jared Porter, who I'm not condoning for any second, but Jared Porter is the villain of all villains. And kudos to the New York Mets for doing the right thing. Where are all those reporters down in Jacksonville?
Here's two things that I've found over time. I mean, it goes back to like the Ray Rice incident. If you have videos or pictures, we see it, it's ugly, it's right there in front of us, we have a gut reaction. If we hear the rumor, we don't see it, as opposed to a guy beating the hell out of a woman versus the words domestic abuse or domestic violence, it softens the blow, and then it's a rumor, and then it's what really happened. Did it really happen this way? Is the guy that turned the other cheek, is he inherently a good guy? How much of a good guy do you have to be to overcome the stigma of a guy that actually turned his back on a really substantial problem? I mean, that's the reason, people rallied around Joe Paterno. Oh, it's Joe. He's a good guy. He's everybody's grandfather. He's won championships. He's led a clean program. His players love him. Well, the adoration, how much bad has to happen before you finally say this guy is not a good guy? You can be a good guy and commit a bad act, but inherently, if you're watching a bad act over and over again, you can't claim to then be a good guy. And that's where I think we start to get into the gray area and the lines being blurred. But when you have video evidence or picture evidence versus the rumors and innuendos and the softening of say, the categorization of the crimes, that's when we tend to look the other way, or we tend to kind of make excuses for bad behavior.
Yeah, you're right. And there's one other aspect of this, and then we can kind of put this to bed. And that is, you mentioned Brett Favre and the relationship that you had with Brett Favre. Are you surprised that he really got away with, everything, with all the things that he was accused of with that young lady with the Jets? And that story seemed to have been completely overshadowed. And again, I didn't think when you mentioned Brett Favre's name, that's not where my brain went. But that's where my brain went on the day that Jared Porter is fired for essentially doing the same thing.
My thought when you mentioned Brett Favre and all the things that went on with Jen Stern and others, there have been rumors of others in the past. My first thought is Irv's words in my ears. And that is, if Deanna found out, she would have had him blank, if you want to fill in the blank. Brett is, for a long time, was a big kid. He was a grown-up kid with a lot of money, a lot of land, the entire family kind of around him. He supported just about everybody. And the one guy, the one stabilizing force in his life, the guy that didn't let him get away with anything, was Irv. Irv called him out on it. Now, Irv was a man's man. You drink and hunt and fish and punch your buddies in the shoulders and all that kind of stuff. And some of the other things, as a guy's code, you look the other way. But between Irv and Deanna, they really kind of put him back into the straight and narrow. So when you talk about why that went away, I think Brett became relatable in so many ways. Go back to when he had the Vicodin problem and he had to go into rehab for a while and he had the drinking problem. And you can talk about some of the addictions that he had. I think because he went to the podium, he sat down with Ron Wolf, who traded for him, right there by his side, his wife Deanna next to him, very sincere. And he was a guy's guy. He was, I wasn't here at that point in time. I got here in 99, but everybody will tell you, he was one of us. He was a hunter. He was a fisherman. He was a guy that was finding downtown. You and I.
He was relatable.
He was relatable. You could find him and Chimura and Frankie Bag and Donuts, Winters, their center, all running around downtown. And yeah, they were chasing women, and yeah, they were having a few drinks, and yeah, they were buying drinks, but they were all one of us. And then everybody looked in the mirror and said, well, I've got a lot of the same problems he has. Well, he's just like me, and he's such a relatable, nice guy. I think that's the reason Favre has a different aura about him. And then I think, really give credit to Deanna Favre for everything that she put up with. She is the one that stuck by him and said, we are going to change the way you do things. And I think Brett became really appreciative of her, and she helped him grow up in a world in which he was, you had to see it here when I got here. There was nothing Brett could do. Nothing. He could have hunted on any land. He could have fished on any land. He could have hunted sitting in the back of his truck in the parking lot at Lambeau Field, and everybody would have thought it was great, And there's people in this world that can get away with that kind of stuff. And he was one of them. And I think that's the reason things went crescendo. And here's the other thing. I don't think Brett realized in Green Bay, he was an enormous whale in a very small pond. In New York, there's him, there's Jeter. You go through the list of great players that have been in that city, that were in that city. He's just one of another. And he's the old guy of the group. I don't think he ever expected for somebody to look at him and go, you're Brett Favre, who cares? I think it was almost arrogance as well that kind of led to part of that downfall.
I just have to pause. Your mic is scratching against something.
Oh, okay. There we go. Better?
I think so.
There we go.
Yeah, just give me like 10 seconds. Yeah, no, it's all good. Just give me like 10 seconds so I can edit this out. Just this part.
Okay.
It's been great so far. No,
Yeah.
you're doing great. You're doing great. The beauty of this podcast is you never know where this is going to go. I love how people sometimes say, what are you going to ask him? I had no idea what I was going to ask you. And I knew this conversation was going to go in 100 different directions. Take the Brett Favre argument and apply it to Alex Rodriguez. Now, Alex Rodriguez, when I was covering baseball, was my mortal enemy. He was a phony. He was a jerk. And I have had 4 or 5 run-ins with the guy. That's all before he got suspended for steroids, by the way. All of my fights with Alex Rodriguez were prior to steroids. Once he got involved in steroids, I didn't have anything to do with him because there was nothing I could add to. He was burying himself. The weirdest part about Alex Rodriguez is this resurgence and the idea that networks are offering compete clauses in their contracts so that he could be on goddamn Fox Sports and ESPN. And he's buying baseball teams, and Jennifer Lopez, who I thought was a smart person, suddenly has no judgment whatsoever. And I have to ask, like, you mentioned guys that could get away with anything. How is Alex Rodriguez beloved now?
You mentioned it. I honestly, we were watching the New Year's Eve festivity.
Yeah, Lopez. I saw the same thing. And I went, him? This is how we're going out on 2020?
But we were in a crowded bar, okay? And
wait, you were in a crowded bar in New Year's Eve 2020?
I was, believe it or not. It was a private party, but yeah, we were.
Wow, I have you just opened up a whole chain of other questions. Now I have to ask.
It was kind of the we've all had it party. So not had enough of it, but we've all had COVID. So all of us were down with it.
So you've had COVID.
Yes. Gotcha. So when he took the stage, remember, he comes up on stage, he's looking at her, and he comes up and gives her a kiss, and all the kids are there. Everybody's talking about how, oh my God, here's what her age is, how good she looks, how good she looked at the Super Bowl. Look at those kids. And then when he walked up, they're like, look at that creep. I mean, it was the whole mood changed. So my thought, and this is the God's honest truth, you asked me this question. At that moment, I thought he is only likable because of her. If he was alone or he was just dating the month,
maybe
he would be looked at as this womanizing, steroid-taking, cheated his way through baseball, loaded money creep who's dating all these hot women. And instead, he found the wholesome Jennifer Lopez, who still kicks ass at 50 plus. She's got great kids, beautiful family. She tries to do it the right way. So maybe she lifted him up high enough, and he somewhat became semi-knowledgeable / likable doing some of the baseball chatter. And I really believe it's because of her.
He's unlistenable. He is that's Sunday Night Baseball, and I like Matt Vasgersian. I'm friends with Matt Vasgersian. That broadcast is unlistenable.
Matty was here in Milwaukee.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
I love.
Yes. Before Matt Vasgersian got the Brewers job, he was the play-by-play announcer of the Syracuse Chiefs, the AAA then of the Blue Jays, when I was working for the Syracuse Crunch hockey team. And Matt and I hosted shows together. We would do baseball and hockey shows together. And he was the baseball guy and I was the hockey guy, which was really weird. And we followed him throughout his career. And I remember when I was 23 years old, my first gig covering Major League Baseball was with the Rockies, and the Brewers came to town. And Matt invited myself to come into the visitors' booth and sit with Bill Schroeder and he doing the Brewers game. And I learned a ton from working. And I had never sat with Matt during a Chiefs game. And I always thanked him for it. And I'm thrilled for his success. That being said, I can't watch Sunday Night Baseball. I won't. Unless it's something I need to see, I'll watch the highlights the next day.
What year was that you were out in Colorado?
So I got to Colorado. This was 98.
Okay.
No. Sorry. 96. Sorry, I left in 98. So I got there mid-season 96. I graduated in May, and I moved out to Denver when I left Syracuse. And I started out, and I asked if I could cover Rockies games, and it was weird because I was producing a morning show. I was 23 years old, but I just wanted to get my chops. You know what I mean? I just wanted to get involved. And so I started covering the Rockies, and this is when they sold out every game. I mean, every game. And Eric Young and Vinny Castilla and Dante Bichette and Larry Walker, And I covered every game of Larry Walker's MVP year in 97, which was a fantastic year. And then in 98, Denver hosted the All-Star game, and I got the gig in Seattle. And so I left. The last thing I did in Denver before physically moving to Seattle was that 98 All-Star game. And I was walking around, you talk about like the mayor, like I didn't have a care in the world because that game that was it. I was done. That's where I had my mascot disaster story, this is a now classic story because I got hired, I think, by the Score in Chicago to do like a stringing assignment. And it was like, 4 voicers. You had to go on a show, and then I had to do an interview, and I had to interview an umpire because some host on the Score wanted to do a segment on an umpire. So I set it up ahead of time that I was going to interview an umpire, and I walked down the tunnel, and I knew the lady who worked, the usher there, and I said, "Which door is the umpire's room?" And she said, "Second door on the right." She's wrong. It was the third door on the right. The second door on the right at Coors Field is the mascot's changing area. And that's where, when I opened the door, I saw every major league mascot. Because remember, this is the home run derby.
Right.
Every major league mascot with their head on the floor. And I cannot get that image out of my head. I've seen Philly Fanatic, Mr. Met, Mariner Moose, the Devil Ray guy, every mascot. I've seen them. Dinger, the Rockies guy. I've seen them all with their heads. I've seen every mascot decapitated. I can't look at mascots the same way. And I remember taking my kids, 5 years ago to a Phillies game where it was the Fanatic's birthday, and all these mascots came to wish him a happy birthday. And I said, "This is like some kind of torture for me."
Right. Here's a good mascot story. I'll tell you this one. So it was the last game at County Stadium.
Uh-huh.
And ESPN used to do that tour where they would do all these last games. And so Joe Morgan's there and Linda Cohn is there, and I'm working for the flagship at the time and part of the broadcast. And so we were going to take with Linda Cohn for ESPN around the inner workings of then County Stadium. Remember, they had that beer barrel out in center field. So if it was a home run, Bernie would be in that beer barrel and then slide down the slide. And years ago, he would pour beer on his head. Well, then that became something that you shouldn't do. So then he would pull a chute and the balloons would come out. And they were bringing back all the old greats, and the guy that was going to be introduced was Warren Spahn, best lefty to ever throw a ball. So Euchre had this big tribute to Warren Spahn. He was preparing, and we were all a part of this. Well, we're out in center field. Linda Cohn grabs me and says, "Hey, I really want to go down Bernie's slide." I said, "Well, let's go." So we go out there. So we go out, and it's myself and a couple of local television reporters, and we're all filming this. Linda does her thing and goes down the slide. When you get down to the bottom of the slide, I went first. So, because she said, "Well, if I slide real fast, will you catch me?" I said, "Okay, no problem." So as I get down there, there's this trap door in the floor. And I just looked down, I said, "What's this?" And I pulled it, and oh my God, it was like balloons everywhere that went out, right? And I closed it real quick, and I could see there was like one balloon left. And so I'm like, "Oh my God, they must have blown these up this morning." This is now like 6 a.m. for a 1 o'clock, first pitch. So we're like, "Oh my God, I got to tell these people to get more balloons." So we go around, we do our thing during the day, and it's still in the back of my mind. So I'm like, okay, before I go upstairs, I sit down, I'm going to do a one-on-one with Euchre at that point. I'm going to go and tell somebody. So I'm walking around the bowels of this place, and if you remember County Stadium, it was an armpit.
I was never there.
Oh my God. We're doing interviews one night with Fernando Pena, and the sewage pipe above his locker broke.
Oh, gross.
Oh, it was awful. So
it's like
I find Brewer, and Bernie's, doing that, and how those mascots do. And I'm like, "Hey, I need you to focus for a second." And I know there's a guy in there, right? And we're sitting there talking. I said, "Look, all the balloons are gone up in the chalet. You need to go blow up more balloons." And he keeps doing that, and I'm like, "Hey, you idiot, whoever's in there, you need to go blow up more balloons." So he kind of waves, and I know at this point in time, if he had a middle finger, he was going to give it to me, because I'm grabbing him by the head, going, "Listen to me, quit screwing around. You've got to go up one more, please." So the beginning of the game, and they're bringing out all the greats. And now when they close County Stadium, they're bringing back all the old Packers that have played there too. But they're bringing out for the pregame all the great Brewers. So there's Robin Yount, Paul Molitor, and you start going through this list.
Sure.
Cecil for Gorman Thomas. And then they say, and the best lefty of all, and they bring him out of the outfield with the old Milwaukee Brewer bullpen cart, the baseball head with the Brewer logo on it. And here's Warren Spahn. And you see Bernie, and the lights are going off, and it's saying, "Go Brewers." He slides down the slide. He lifts the chute. One balloon. One balloon. So later that night, we get done doing the closing at County Stadium, and it's myself and my engineer, and Euchre's long gone. He did a soliloquy, so we were going to go down and get some dirt. And there is the guy walking, holding the suit that was Bernie Brewer. And he looks at me, and he said, "I thought you were blank." I said, "No, you son of a bitch. I told you I let all the balloons go." And he was just like mortified. He said, "I almost lost my job." There you go. That was my mascot story.
Man. Very nice. Very nice. I know there's a lot of stuff pending. What can you say about the departure from the radio station that I met you at? I know they used to be 105.7. I don't know what number they are now.
In Milwaukee. And I've been there 10 years, going on 10 years. And I had started the network, Bill Michael Sports Talk Network. I owned the company originally and sold the company off. And it just, it comes a time where corporations take over, and what we do, and the reason I love radio is there's a romance to it. We are informative, and I know so many people smarter than me. I'm like the ugly guy standing at the end of the line of the bar at the end. But there's a romance to entertainment radio. And I'm an old radio guy. I love it. I love podcasts. I love the ability to connect with people. And when you start to get and feel as if you're being programmed away from what it is, your instincts are telling you. And I've been at WOW in Cincinnati, a big clear stick all throughout the country. I've been at some of the better radio stations, obviously WWJ worked for a long time. I was there when they won a Super Bowl. When you did things your way, you were very successful in doing it. When you're not successful because somebody else is telling you how to do it, you start to fidget, and it doesn't become fun anymore. And so I had been approached by some other people. They said, "What do you want to do?" And so I just kind of felt it was the right time. And I think the company kind of felt it was the right time to do. Obviously, there's a lot of things coming down the pipe that are new, such as podcasts like this, also what I'm starting to do a little more of. But the network was my baby. I had built something that they said could not be done in the state of Wisconsin, because it's a very, very, very conservative state in that realm. And we did it, and we did what everybody said they couldn't. So I thought, you know what? It's not that I wanted to start over. It's just that I wanted to be free. I kind of wanted to be happy. So, I mean, I got some things that are cooking, and I'm really, I love learning. I'm learning all the new technologies when it comes to podcasts, when it comes to the ability to screens, voice work, and all that kind of stuff. So it's not that I'm some old dinosaur and I'm completely technologically unsound. It's just that I wanted to do something. So I'm hoping to announce some things here in the next week or two, and I'll be back, and I'll have you on.
You'll come back on Sports with Friends.
Yeah. And we'll talk about it.
Well, we're not allowed to repeat any stories. No, the one thing about podcasts that I found, and the story with me and podcasts go back a long ways. We actually predate the word. When I was at Major League Baseball, they talked about, we had this exclusivity deal. I don't know if you remember, in the late 90s, there was a thing called Real Audio. Yeah. And we had it when we signed on our show. They put us on an exclusivity deal with Real Audio, and actually took us off satellite radio, which was weird because back then satellite radio wasn't where it was at. It was real, and we were on Real Audio. And then after the 2003 season, our exclusivity window ended, and we had a meeting and I would take credit if I thought of it. It's not my idea, so this is not my story. But the way this all went down, we had this long conference table, and there were a bunch of people, guys, girls. There were a bunch of MLB executives, and they said, "How can we broaden the exposure of this show that Darryl Hamilton and myself were doing?" And the idea was, hey, why don't we figure out how much of the radio show we can turn into an MP3 that makes it an easy download? And then on the homepage of MLB.com, put the link to the show when we're not live. Right. So 23 hours or 21 hours of the day, that link would happen, and people could download the MP3 of our show and download it and sync it to this hot new device, the iPod.
Right.
And we were like, yeah, sure, let's do that. And we've been doing the show, and I'll give Darryl the credit for this because he was obsessed with Seinfeld just like I was. And Darryl, he would always crack up at the episode where Elaine takes all of the birth control sponges.
Right.
And then has to decide if you're sponge worthy.
Right.
And Darryl, we would do our show, and people would call up with dumb trade ideas. I mean, you did radio for years. Like, some of these dumb trade ideas. And a guy would call up, I want to trade Noma to the Astros, some stupid thing. And we had heard this word called podcast. And we thought it was like a trendy, goofy. We made fun of it. And Darryl would go, now you think you're going to get on the podcast with crap like that? Are you podcast worthy? You're not podcast worthy. This segment's not podcast worthy. And that was our joke for pretty much the whole 2004 season. And then in 2005, we heard that Ricky Gervais had a podcast. And we were like, we'd been doing this for 18 months.
Right.
So Darryl and I may be one of the world's first podcasters.
You're the Lewis and Clark of podcasts.
We were. And it's funny because I've created podcasts that failed. You know what I mean? Like, there have been shows that just don't go anywhere and they don't do anything. And I had a show in 2011 that I did with Darryl, didn't work. And when I created Sports with Friends, it wasn't originally called that. And it was going to be a show that I was going to try to get Darryl to do. And then he was killed. And after he was killed, I remember I didn't want to do it. And somebody said to me, you got to keep doing the podcast. And I said, well, the only people I want to talk to are my friends. And my mother was obsessed with the game Words with Friends.
Right.
And I said, well, why don't I do Sports with Friends? And that's literally how the show came about.
There you go.
And, 284 episodes later, I mean, we're rocking and rolling. And my favorite example, and we did a tribute to Darryl on episode 100, but the person who's been on the most is LaTroy Hawkins. Because LaTroy Hawkins, you remember LaTroy Hawkins from his days with the Brewers. LaTroy Hawkins, in 2015, when I didn't know what the podcast was going to be, I lent him a recorder. And he took it on the road with him with the Blue Jays. And he interviewed like Josh Donaldson. And that's like episode, here, I have the list. I can tell you. He interviewed Josh Donaldson, and it's episode 27. Episode 27, LaTroy Hawkins interviews Josh Donaldson. Because they were sitting on the plane.
Hey, that's cool.
And it was cool, and it was fun, and because we didn't have a drive. I didn't have a plan. So he's been on the most. Eli Manning's been on 5 times, and we need him to come on. And the funny part about it is Eli was going to eclipse LaTroy until we found out that LaTroy Hawkins is the godfather of Patrick Mahomes, the Chiefs quarterback.
That I did know.
And
you want to talk about Mahomes?
Well,
so we're at Super Bowl, and Mahomes is scheduled to come on my program. He's with Lee Steinberg.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Lee, the agent. Lee gives me a wink and a nod and says, I think I got him for you. Hang tight. Patrick comes over and sits down. Unbelievably nice kid.
So nice.
sits down. We're sitting there kind of BSing. And I look at my computer. There's breaking news. Alex Smith has been traded from the Kansas City Chiefs. And I looked at him and I said, well, congratulations on you being starting quarterback. He has no idea we're on the air and says, what the blank are you talking about? I turn my computer around and he sits back and he sighs, he smiles, and Lee is now behind him, kind of tapping him on the shoulder. And he looks at me and says, no. And I said, yeah, that's how he found out he was going to be the starting quarterback for Kansas.
Oh, wow.
It was
That's
in
awesome.
There, yeah, we were sitting up there for Radio Row, and he was making rounds.
Well, I called LaTroy when the Chiefs made the playoffs the first time. So this is the year prior to last year, 2018, and LaTroy's social media was like gaga for the Chiefs. And I said, "What? Do you have an investment? What's your story here?" And he's like, "That's my godson." And I said, "No way." And he goes, "Not only that," he goes, "You played catch with him." I go, "Excuse me?" And I was told this in 2000 and I think 2 or 3. Patrick Mahomes is 4 or 5 years old. Pat Mahomes brought him to Fort Myers Twins spring training. And I was hanging out because my guys there were Jock Jones and Torrey Hunter and LaTroy Hawkins. Those were my guys. And Pat Mahomes was with them. And I didn't not have a relationship with Pat Mahomes, but he wasn't playing. So I didn't see him nearly as much. I'd only met him a couple of times. But young Patrick Mahomes had a little Nerf ball, and he threw it at me. And I caught it. And I tossed it back to him, and he loved it. So he threw it back to me. And I played catch with this kid, and I don't remember it. Or I didn't. I remember it now. But the God's honest truth.
I think I'd be sending him a Nerf football or something and saying, hey, can you sign this to Uncle Pat?
Well, I have a running gag. I have a running gag on the show because my whole thing has said, I've said, number one, Jacob deGrom babysat my kid. I've said that on your radio show. In 2014, I took my daughter to Citi Field, and the security person that was supposed to watch her for 5 minutes so I could interview Terry Collins literally left because of some emergency. And Jacob deGrom was a rookie, and he said, I'll watch her. And he watched her for 6 minutes so I could interview Patrick Mahomes. So my joke is Jacob deGrom babysat my kid. That was my standard joke. And for years, my joke was Donovan McNabb helped me move, because my senior year at Syracuse was Donovan McNabb's freshman year, and he knew me because I was the sideline reporter of the team. And when I got the job in Denver, I didn't have any furniture, but I had boxes of stuff, and I tried to shove a box into the trunk of my Saturn that didn't fit. And Donovan McNabb comes driving down, the road, Comstock, and he sees this, and he goes, "You guys are pitiful," to me and my friend Larry, and he goes, so I put the box in his truck, and he drove the 600 feet to the mailbox so I could mail this box to Denver, Colorado. And so when Rush Limbaugh made the comment of about Donovan McNabb being a black quarterback and black quarterbacks have a better advantage and all this stuff, and he says all these inappropriate things, and I was on Fox Sports Radio, and someone said, "What do you make of the Donovan McNabb situation?" And I didn't know it, and all I said was, "Well, he helped me move." So that's my running gag. So now I have a running gag that is Donovan McNabb helped me move, Jacob deGrom babysat my kid, and I played catch with Patrick Mahomes.
There you go.
And all three things are true statements, but not nearly what you think they are.
Right. Yeah. It's not like Jacob deGrom is stopping over to your house to watch.
Right. Like he's eating out of my pantry.
Right. Exactly. No, a buddy of mine, he was a kid, and his babysitter dated Pete Rose. So we actually played softball together years later. And we were talking one night. We're all sitting around, and they started, obviously the conversation goes, should he or should he not be in the Hall of Fame? And he busts out. I mean, this is in Cincinnati. He busts out with this, "I hate Pete Rose." And we're thinking it's because of the gambling. We're like, just because he gambled? No. He used to come over once his dad left. The babysitter was there, and they did things on the couch. But Dad would buy a certain. Remember when you get pop bottles in the case, the old wood cases, and then the pop bottles were all in there individually, 7-ounce Pepsi. So his dad would go out and for the week buy a pound of lunch meat, a pickle loaf, an olive loaf, and all these different things, German stuff and Italian stuff in Cincinnati. And that was their lunch meat. Well, when the girl would babysit, he'd come over, make this big half-pound sandwich, eat up 3, 4, 5 slices of bread, and drink 4 or 5 Pepsis. And Dad would come up and take his belt off and chase poor Skip around the house going, "You damn dad." Like, I didn't eat any, Dad. I didn't eat any. Pete Rose.
Oh man, that's so funny. You've been more than generous with your time. Thank you so much for coming on. How can people find you if they want to know what your next move is? And you realize that Milwaukee is going to listen to this podcast. Once you tweet this, they follow you. They love you so much. Once you retweet this podcast, I'm telling you, everyone in Milwaukee is going to pray for us to do a show together.
Yeah, it is. You can find me on Twitter at Bill_Michaels, Michaels. You can find me on Facebook under Bill Michaels. Instagram, same thing. All those different platforms. I'm on Twitch under the same. There's a Bill Michaels YouTube channel as well. And like you, I'm trying to follow in your footsteps through podcast.
That's great.
But those are the ways to get a hold of me. And I'm just, you know what? They said to me, "You're going to take 2, 3, 4 months off," and I, that was great for like 2 days.
Oh, not you. You're a hustler. There's people that they can't do that. They can't do that, and it's an impossible feeling.
My agent called me. I went through a hell of a divorce last year, and it just was draining, which is another reason I kind of walked away. But my agent called me and said, "You know what? Turn your phone off for about a week. Just go enjoy yourself." And that lasted about 2 days. And I called him up and I said, "Hey, is anybody calling you?" He said, "Yeah, I got about 10 phone calls because you're not answering the phone." And I said, "Why don't you go ahead and forward them over? Let's start talking." So it took me all of about 24, 48 hours. I recharged the batteries. I got to do it different and great.
Love it.
And then the Packers, I'm ready to go.
Yeah, well, if the Packers win, then they're going to be like, "I can't believe you talk Packers." And if the Packers lose, no one's going to notice that we didn't talk Packers. So what can I say? I hope they win, and if they win, they win. And Brady's a cheater, so just win. That's all I can say. What do I know?
It would be the type of year though that they would. The Bucks were really, really playing good basketball, and then COVID hit. They kind of came crashing down in the bubble. The Badgers had won the Big Ten. We're heading off to the NCAA tournament. The Brewers were set to have a pretty good season. Remember, they had just announced Christian Yelich signed a long-term deal. Yep. They were ready to crescendo with enthusiasm, and then 2 days later,
we called that right. We said once all these guys were gonna, because of the CBA, they're so worried about the rules changing. All the superstars have to sign long-term deals, including Arenado, including Trout, and Harper, and all these guys that were going to sign. And I said, "Watch, Yelich has to sign," and that was weird. And look, we can go down a whole rabbit hole because I was not a fan of the 2020 season. I didn't think it should happen, and I hope that if they start it, they do so and don't bitch about how much money they're losing.
Right.
The NHL said it very well. They said, "We can't afford to be out of sight, out of mind." Right. And I buy that. If that's worth $1 billion to you, fine. But in the day off between games 5 and 6 of the World Series this year, Manfred comes out and the first thing he says is, "We're losing $8 billion." I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Then don't play.
The ugliest thing about this was the battling back and forth over money. And then Manfred is caught saying, "Well, we were only going to play 60 games anyway." Well, if that was the case, then why in the hell did you put the fan base through the back and forth monetarily?
All right, we went there.
So,
okay, fine. But you know what the true crime was? The true crime was, number one, if for the Cubs owner and the Cardinals owner, they came out and the first thing they said was that they're hemorrhaging money. And all I had to say was, "You want to take the numbers? How are you 2019, 2018, 2017, 2016? Your profits were so high that you have slush funds that could pay the players for 162 games. That wasn't a problem. That's number one. Number two, you notice that Gary Bettman and Don Fear, not only did they come up with the bubble before the NBA did, their bubble, and they extended their collective bargaining by 4 years. Now, baseball, what I would have said was shut down, blame it on COVID. People would have been mad. But not as mad as they're going to be when we get this vaccine going and everybody's welcoming fans back, and that's when you're going to have a labor stoppage.
Right.
And you'll see that this sport is that's a compounded crisis by this pandemic, and baseball should have not played 2020. And I know Dodger fans hate when I say that, but I believe it. I believe it in my heart. We can talk about that and much, much more. Bill Michaels, thank you so much for doing this. Now, he gave us social media out, so I can say if there's anything that you heard that Bill said, not me, but Bill said that you have an issue with, do me a favor, reach out to him directly and leave me the hell out of it. For Bill Michaels, I'm Seth Everett. Thank you for listening to another edition of Sports with Friends. We did it. Oh, we could have gone on for another hour.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we could have done it. We could have easily done it. I'm looking at the clock. I'm like, oh my God.
How long was it?
Probably an hour and 5.
Oh wow, that's great.
But we didn't take a break.
No, nonstop, no drink, nothing.
No, nothing. And it was great stories. You were great. It's fantastic. I love this podcast. It's so easy.
Yep. No doubt. On Sunday, I did one of the podcasts for the Packers postgame show and just got going with playing music, the whole thing. Now, I did get censored because I don't have the licensing to play the music, which I completely forgot about.
There's all kinds of rules, yeah.
Yeah. But man, it was so much fun to just kind of wing it and do it again. We did beer tasting, for God's sakes, at halftime. That's what our halftime show was beer